Join our growing YouTube family. Subscribe now and be part of every exciting moment. Ever had a similar encounter or strange moment? We'd be thrilled if you'd share it with us in the comments. Who knows, your story might be featured next. A bone-chilling mist clings to the ancient brickwork, a spectral shroud cast over what was once a bastion of healing, now a monument to forgotten screams. Here, nestled amongst the rolling hills of rural Kentucky, stands the formidable, foreboding structure known as Waverly Hills Sanatorium. Its imposing silhouette, a silent sentinel against the twilight sky, evokes an immediate sense of dread, each window a vacant eye staring out into eternity. This isn't merely an abandoned building, it's a living scar on the landscape, a repository of unspeakable suffering and the lingering echoes of countless lives extinguished prematurely. Tonight, dear listeners, we plunge into the heart of America's most haunted hospital, a real-life horror story that defies logic and whispers of the unquiet dead. Our tale begins not with a ghost, but with Dr. Elias Vance, a man of unflappable reason, a world-renowned infectious disease specialist whose career was built on empirical data and scientific certainty. He arrived at Waverly Hills in the early 1930s, during the horrific peak of the White Plague, tuberculosis. Armin, a dedicated scientist, viewed the pervasive superstitions surrounding the sanatorium as mere folk tales, a coping mechanism for a populace grappling with an invisible killer. He scoffed at the whispers among the staff about the chill that permeated certain wards regardless of the heat, the phantom coughs echoing from empty rooms, or the mournful laments heard in the dead of night. To him, these were simply the understandable anxieties of overburdened nurses and traumatized patients. Yet, Waverly Hills had a way of seeping into the most hardened of souls. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly, gnawing at Dr. Vance's ironclad skepticism. Instruments he was certain he'd sterilized and laid out for a procedure would be found scattered, or worse, seemingly rearranged by unseen hands. The distant, faint strains of melancholic music, like a broken phonograph record, would drift from the isolation wards, only to vanish the instant he approached, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier, colder than before. He attributed it to sleep deprivation, the immense pressure of battling an epidemic, the insidious whispers of a mind pushed to its limits. But a hairline crack, almost imperceptible, was forming in the bedrock of his logic. The pivotal moment, the fracture that shattered his scientific resolve, occurred during a particularly brutal night. A new experimental treatment, desperate in its conception, was being administered to a young patient, a girl no older than 10, whose fragile body was ravaged by the disease. As Dr. Vance meticulously adjusted the ventilator, the lights in the ward flickered violently, then plunged the room into an inky, suffocating darkness. The emergency lights sputtered on, casting an eerie, pulsating amber glow. In that terrifying, strobe-like illumination, Dr. Vance saw her. A spectral child, translucent but undeniably present, stood at the foot of the girl's bed, her tiny, spectral hand gently stroking the fevered brow of the dying patient. Her eyes, he would later recount with a voice still hoarse with remembered fear, were not accusatory, but wide with an innocent, heartbreaking sorrow, a profound sense of loss that mirrored the suffering he witnessed daily. He blinked, and she was gone, absorbed by the shifting shadows. His gloved hands trembled uncontrollably, a tremor that had nothing to do with surgical precision. The cold logic of science could no longer explain away what he had witnessed. He couldn't dismiss it now. The image of that child's desolate eyes was etched into his very being. Driven by an insatiable need to understand, to rationalize. He began a clandestine investigation, discreetly questioning the long-serving orderlies and nurses. Mrs. Gable, an ancient nurse whose eyes had seen too much suffering, finally saw a flicker of genuine belief in his usually impassive face. She began to share the true horrors of Waverly Hills. She spoke of the infamous death tunnel, the underground chute used to discreetly transport the staggering number of bodies from the hospital to the waiting hearses, shielding the living patients from the horrifying reality of the mounting death toll. She spoke of Room 502 on the 5th floor, where legend held that a young nurse, heartbroken and unwed, had tragically taken her own life, her spirit forever trapped within those walls. And she spoke, in hushed, fearful tones, of Timmy, a spectral little boy who reportedly played with toys in the empty hallways, his laughter, thin and mournful, echoing through the night. The stories piled up. The sudden, inexplicable cold spots, the disembodied whispers, the faint smell of antiseptic and decay that would appear and vanish without reason. Dr. Vance found himself consumed by Waverly Hills' grim, bloody history. He scoured dusty medical records, delving into forgotten newspaper clippings and patient logs. He uncovered a horrifying reality, not just the devastating impact of tuberculosis, but also documented cases of gross neglect, of experimental treatments that bordered on torture, of patients left to suffer and die alone, their last moments filled with terror and abandonment. He discovered a pattern of institutional cruelty, a disregard for human dignity that transcended the disease itself. A profound sense of outrage, a visceral empathy for the countless forgotten souls, began to gnaw at his scientific objectivity. Waverly Hills, he realized, was not just a hospital, but a massive, unmarked tomb, a place where the pain of the dead festered, feeding something far more sinister. The sanatorium, it became clear, was not merely haunted by individual spirits, but by the overwhelming collective anguish of tens of thousands who had drawn their last breath within its walls. The sheer volume of suffering, the raw, unaddressed trauma, had created an impenetrable psychic residue, a dark energy that attracted, perhaps even manifested, something ancient and deeply malevolent, something that reveled in despair. The true climax arrived on a night when the world outside seemed to hold its breath. A blizzard of epic proportions raged, burying the sanatorium in a pristine yet isolating blanket of white. All staff, save for a skeleton crew and Dr. Vance, were snowed in. He was alone in the medical library, poring over ancient blueprints of the original hospital structure, when a horrifying cacophony erupted from the very bowels of the building, from the deepest levels of the death tunnel itself. It was a symphony of agony, guttural screams, the scraping of unseen forces, the horrifying sound of massive metal doors creaking open and slamming shut, and the agonizing, heart-wrenching wails of what sounded like an entire legion of tormented souls. The air in the library grew thick, heavy with a palpable sense of despair, of ancient rage, of a suffocating, almost physical evil. He knew, with a terrifying certainty that bypassed all reason, that whatever entities stirred beneath Waverly Hills, they were not merely residual imprints. They were furious, they were reaching, and they were gaining strength. Driven by a primal mix of terror and an inexplicable magnetic compulsion, he grabbed an old, tarnished lantern he found tucked away in a maintenance closet, its beam weak but steady. He knew, instinctively, that he had to go down into the death tunnel. As he descended the winding, claustrophobic staircase, the screaming intensified, a chorus of suffering that clawed at his sanity, pushing him to the brink. With a final, echoing clang, he found himself in the vast, labyrinthine expanse of the death tunnel. The scene before him was one of pure, unadulterated terror. a tableau of the damned. Shadows writhed on the cold, damp walls, mimicking the contorted figures of countless bodies that had passed through here. Disembodied whispers, a chilling symphony of sorrow and rage, filled the air, assaulting his ears, his very soul. In the center of the largest chamber, where the body chute opened directly onto the rail line outside, a swirling, inky vortex pulsed with malevolent energy. It was growing, expanding, a hungry maw drawing on all the pain and fear that had saturated this place for decades. Dr. Vance's blood ran cold. He realized with a jolt of incandescent horror that this wasn't just a haunting. It was a desperate, violent attempt by something truly ancient and malevolent to tear through the veil, to manifest its full power. And then he saw them, distinct and undeniable. Sarah, the young woman from room 502, now more solid, more vibrant in her spectral glow than he had ever seen her. And beside her, little Timmy, his small, translucent hand reaching out, not in play, but in a gesture of profound, desperate fear. Their expressions were not of anger, but of terrifying, desperate helplessness. They were trapped, forced participants, and something far darker, an entity that reveled in the misery of the human condition, was using them and the other tormented spirits as a conduit, a gateway into the living world. The true entity, a colossal amorphous shadow, began to solidify within the vortex, its presence an icy, crushing weight. In that moment of ultimate horror, amidst the cacophony of spectral wails and the rising power of the malevolent entity, a sudden, blinding flash of insight pierced through Dr. Vance's terror. It wasn't a scientific solution, but something far deeper, far more ancient. He remembered the long-forgotten stories of the indigenous peoples of this land, tales of acknowledging the earth's wounds, of offering respect to those who died tragically, a concept dismissed by modern medicine. It wasn't about exorcism, but about peace. It was about recognition. He began to speak, his voice trembling at first, then growing stronger, cutting through the spectral din. He addressed the unseen entities not with fear or commands, but with a profound, heartfelt plea. He acknowledged their immense pain, their forgotten lives, their unjust deaths. He offered them not dismissal, but understanding. He spoke of Sarah's heartbreak, of Timmy's lost childhood, of the nameless thousands who had suffered. He spoke of healing, of peace, of the light that awaited them, a release from their earthly bonds. He spoke of the inherent dignity of every life, even those cut short by disease and neglect. He poured out his empathy, his regret for the suffering they had endured, a human connection in a place that had only ever known cold, clinical detachment. As his voice resonated through the dark, cold tunnel, something profound shifted. The swirling vortex began to recede, slowly, almost reluctantly, its immense pressure easing. The guttural screams diminished into faint, mournful whispers. The oppressive presence of the larger entity seemed to recoil, its form flickering and shrinking. Sarah's form shimmered, and for a fleeting, agonizing moment, her eyes met his. No longer filled with despair, but with a profound, peaceful gratitude, a silent farewell. Then, like a fragile moth taking flight, she and little Timmy faded. Truly gone this time, not just from his sight, but from the oppressive, suffocating weight of Waverly Hills. The silence that followed was deafening, a profound, almost sacred calm replacing the previous chaos. The air in the death tunnel, and indeed throughout the entire sanatorium, felt lighter, no longer choked by the despair of generations. Dr. Vance stumbled out of the tunnel, covered in dust and sweat, exhausted but inexplicably, profoundly at peace. The pervasive haunting, he knew, was over. Not through scientific intervention, but through empathy, through acknowledgement, through finally bearing witness to the forgotten suffering. Dr. Elias Vance remained at Waverly Hills for the remainder of the tuberculosis epidemic, a changed man. He continued his groundbreaking medical research, but with a newfound compassion, a deeper understanding of the human spirit's resilience and its enduring echoes. The sanatorium, while still a stark reminder of a dark past, no longer held the same oppressive dread. The chilling whispers of ghosts faded into a poignant legend, replaced by the quiet hum of healing for those who still lived, and a profound, solemn peace for those who had died. And sometimes, late at night, a faint, peaceful humming could still be heard. Not a sound of sorrow, but a soft, ethereal lullaby, a serenade from long-departed souls, finally, truly at rest. Their silent cries finally heard, their pain acknowledged. This, dear listeners, is the true story of Waverly Hills Sanatorium, and how one man's journey from unwavering scientific skepticism to profound human empathy brought peace not only to the living, but, at long last, to the restless dead, turning a place of torment into a solemn testament to the power of compassion.